morning, everyone. Good afternoon to most of you, and good evening to some of you. Welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. I am your host, Jason Miles. And the first question I have, did anyone here, are you guys new here from checking out my buddy, my co-host, my homie, my dog, Pascal Robert, on the Majority Report? Anyone? Great episode of the Majority Report with Pascal Robert yesterday. As a matter of fact, let's just bring in the man of the Mau Mau Hour right now. He is my homie, my dog, my co-host to the end, through and through. He is the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles.
How are you?
Doing all right, man. Doing okay. I had a long conversation with Tori Reed this morning.
Uh-oh. Are we in trouble?
Oh, no. We were just talking about all kinds of we have stream of consciousness conversations whenever Tori and I get on the phone. We talk about 25,000 different things. We always digress away from the original topic, but it's always entertaining, often educational, and quite frankly, very, very soothing to have someone you can talk about what's going on in the world who kind of understands where you're coming from.
Well, for those of you that are new to the channel, please hit like, please hit subscribe, please hit the bell so you are notified every time we go live. We usually go live every Tuesday through Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific time, and Saturday morning for me, 9 a.m. Pacific time. We also have a returning co-host that we haven't seen for a while. People have literally been asking for this guy on the Twitters. I was watching on Majority Report, and people were talking about who is this guy? People kept saying that. Who is this guy? We like this Pascal guy. And then someone said, oh, he's on This is Revolution. And then someone said, oh, that show Djene Bajalan is on sometimes. I'm like, sometimes? Djene Bajalan books guests. So please welcome, coming all the way from merry old England, Djene Bajalan.
Greetings, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. Pascal, congratulations on your phenomenal performance on the Majority Report. That is it's a big platform, and it's excellent to have some good, firm-handed left-wing content being broadcast out to the normies. And I thought you did an excellent job in laying down the 4 iterations of the Black political class in about 6 minutes. Which was
that was a record. I think that was a record.
That was a record. I mean, you were well known for your speed run of Haitian history, but I think this one was definitely comparative in terms of both conciseness and clarity and speed. Because some people, I think, when they talk fast, actually aren't very clear in what they're saying. But Pascal has everything so organized in his mind, and he speaks so clearly that he can speak at 200 words per minute, and you feel that you learned something at the end. So it was really a phenomenal importance. And yes, devoid reality. My mom made me get a haircut today, so I have had a haircut. That's true. So yes, was I on last week? I can't even remember. I don't. All the weeks run into one another. I thought I was on last week.
No.
What was last week's Saturday show?
Last week we had a good show, though. I remember that.
They all starting to run together. I was like, Cypress?
Big mush in the mind.
Yeah, it wasn't Cypress. Oh, was it the house music one?
No,
that was 2 weeks ago.
Left Reckoning.
Reckoning.
I was
on that show.
It was a good show. And
you
I
were
was
on
on
that show.
I was
so
on that
you know what? Then I didn't need it. You can go home then. You can go home. I didn't need you. Sorry.
No, I missed you. I missed you, Jason, and I missed Pascal.
I see where Sons Marcus today, huh? Without Marcus,
we're without Marcus today. Marcus has some personal stuff he has to take care of, so we were without Marcus today.
Oh,
we'll leave it at that.
Marcus.
But
we have important announcements, do we not?
We have a couple announcements. I do. Okay, I'm going to put here, Djene. I'm going to put you here, Djene, and then I'm going to do this. Bam. I want you to announce about the magazine that you're
Oh
editing.
yeah. Well, so as some of you may know, we there was a little bit of a hoo-ha with Zero Books last year, and Doug Lane left the Zero Books YouTube channel, but he has been rebuilding under the brand Sublation. So we'll be publishing books again, which is coming very soon. We have some exciting books, which I don't think I can reveal who the authors are yet to the public, but let's just say one of the authors was a very popular guest from this show, and has a very, let's just say, juicy book in the pipelines.
You're
And
welcome.
that was Jason's doing. So we've got the publishing, but in addition to that, we are going to be hopefully on May the 1st launching Sublation Magazine, a new online magazine, which I'll be the managing editor of, which means basically I have to do all the donkey work. But it's going to have some excellent writers for it. There's a gentleman, Pascal Robert, who will be writing for us. There'll be a fellow called Jason Miles writing for us, as well as all your favorites. The Ashley Frowley, Ben Burgess is going to be writing something for us. So, and there's a big team behind it. We're hopefully going to create a magazine which has a little bit, I want to say, of the TIR philosophy coming from Pascal. The idea that we need to have a non-sectarian discussion and debate, because a lot of magazines out there, are very good magazines, are in fact, whether they advertise it or not, sectarian magazines or affiliated with particular political parties or projects. We're going to attempt in the best possible way to have a good forum for discussion on the left with all the new, with all our favorite writers. And I'm really glad that, Jason and Pascal are going to be on, and Kuba will be writing. So it's going to be like, I don't know, TIR, the written version.
Well, I'm pretty excited. I'm excited about it because someone jokingly said Diaries of a Teenage Anarchist. I was like, I don't know, Djene, is that what we're going to call my feature? That'd be a nice little feature.
Yeah, Diaries of a Teenage. That's actually a good
idea.
That's a good,
Jordan, you're on to something.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about this project. It's gonna be some work, but I have a good team. I have people writing for us, and hopefully we'll be able to grow it into something where we can, regularly, we're not going to be paying the mega bucks, but something where we can pay authors, we can get new authors in and new voices. Because I think one of the problems with media, and I'd like to hear Pascal and Jason's thoughts on this, is that it's kind of a closed shop. It comes down to a lot of connections, and if you're not quite in the connection, if you're not quite in the appropriate circuit of people, it is very hard to come in. There are ways you can come in. I got into writing, for example, basically because I have the PhD union card from the appropriate institutions. But left-wing organizations are supposed to be into the working class, yet very few of the authors come from the working class, and very often there's not much opportunity for people of working class origin or from outside existing structures to actually get the practice writing or get the opportunity to write. And I think one of the things I hope we can do with Sublation is have a good mix of your old intellectual PMC philosophy types, nothing wrong with that, but also get new voices, younger voices, and more working class voices out there in a left media sphere. So it's a big task, but we'll see how it goes.
So I want to be brief with this because we don't have that much time with our guest. As our guest is a parent of a young child. I know time is of the essence. He has a window. There's a small window our guest has where there's going to be peace. And once we get beyond that window, it's like juggling knives when you have no experience juggling knives. But Thursday, we didn't know how the show was going to, or Pascal didn't know how the show was going to go. I had a lot of confidence the show would go well Thursday. Show was doing pretty good numbers. And I said, oh, Steve just said Dwayne Haskins passed away. That's a damn shame. We will definitely cover that on Monday. Right, Rest in peace to Wayne Haskins. Damn shame. I said there was going to be no trigger warning for today. We're going to do a trigger warning segment because all of Thursday is a trigger warning segment because there's nothing that pisses Pascal off more than talking about Ed Koch.
Oh,
Ed
Bro,
Koch.
Pascal once sent me an interview with Ed Koch, and he was
sent
just
us
like, "Watch
both.
this."
He sent us
Oh, you
both.
said that? I watched that. And I was like, man, I don't even know how Pascal can look at a white New Yorker in the eye. This guy was like appalling. He was like appallingly terrible. Oh, and can we give a shout out, a big get well soon to see Derek Vaughn?
Oh, for sure,
Yes.
no doubt, man. Shout out to Derek Vaughn, who, thank goodness, didn't have to have emergency surgery, who is in convalescence right now from his hospital stay. Hope Vaughn gets better quickly and is on the mend. We had a show scheduled for him today. He couldn't make, but we're going to reschedule. And keep thoughts, and for those who pray, prayers up for Vaughn to make sure that he's all right, man. Vaughn is our man, and we want to make sure he's around. Man, he's a good cat. No doubt.
Yeah, so get well soon, Derek, and take care of yourself.
For real. But we're ready to rock and roll today, man, in terms of where we're headed with our show and our guests. But Djene, how are things going on in lovely England?
Well, things are good. There was a big scandal here because it seems like the Chancellor of the Exchequer's wife was not paying taxes. So big surprise there. And what else is happening? Well, I've been in the house because it's a very exciting day for tomorrow. It is my father's birthday. So
congrats to your dad. Wonderful. How old will he be?
He will be 73 years old.
Okay.
73 years young.
73
Sorry,
years
it took me a while to find the segment. My computer somehow the page refreshed where I found it.
I thought you were going to get the Rachel Dolezal picture I showed you today.
I was not going to get the Rachel Dolezal picture because that would have been a bit of a chuckle. But this is a ball ache. Oh!
I thought we were not doing this week, man.
Someone sent this to us. So
she has lovely hair.
Here you go.
I agree with that. I'm just not sure that I would say that if it weren't for blacks, there wouldn't be a democracy at all.
Well, we know how we got democracy. It was through a decades-long black resistance struggle called the Civil Rights Movement. That is a black rights struggle. So you may not like the framing, but what I can tell you is the Double V for Victory campaign was black people were fighting in an army. They were going overseas. They were dying to liberate other countries and then coming home and being lynched for wearing their uniform. They were coming home and they could not vote. They were coming home and they could see German prisoners of war going into restaurants and being served where they could not be served.
I completely agree with all of that.
Right, but you want to treat that as a marginal to the American story. But you can't call yourself the greatest democracy and the greatest democratizing force in the country while violently and brutally suppressing democracy at home. And that's what happened for millions of American citizens.
Here's where I take some objection. You're talking about, if you say the country, that we were fighting for democracy overseas and we were not living it, walking the walk, talking the talk at home, I completely agree with you. But you specifically say the greatest generation brutally suppressing, many of this generation brutally suppressing democracy for millions of Americans. Me, and I think Tom Brokaw, when he originally wrote the book, The Greatest Generation, was talking about 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds who came out of the farm fields of the Midwest, who came out of ethnic neighborhoods in Brooklyn and South Philly and stormed the beaches of Normandy and fought to defeat the worst regime, I would argue, in world history. And to say that they were 20, 30-year-olds. The country was brutally suppressing blacks, but the greatest generation wasn't.
Well, they were.
I mean, they weren't. You're telling me that a kid coming off a farm in Indiana or a kid who came from Brooklyn was suppressing
So Indiana
black
had
people?
the largest population of the Klan in the United States. The Klan was
I understand, but that
researched
wasn't the
in
20-year-old
Indiana.
kid who
You don't think
risked his life.
20-year-olds were in the Klan?
Ah!
I mean, I can't say I disagree with too much she was saying, to be honest.
I got a bigger problem with this guy's like masturbatory genuflection to the greatest generation narrative, which is really a pain in the ass to me because they didn't save shit. It was the Russians who defeated the Nazis. And what is he talking about? We defeated the worst empire in there. So I was like, well, who did you defeat? I mean, the Japanese, maybe that's number one. And number two, like, you can't.
I mean, they still fought, Pascal. I get what you're saying, but please don't underestimate the fact that people actually did fight.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's no question that there were, tens of thousands of American soldiers who went and fought in World War II. Yeah, I get that. No one can deny that. But I'm not a fan of greatest generation framing at all in any way, not just in the American context. And overall, we have the same kind of dynamic in Haiti as well. They refer to certain generations of Haitians as the greatest generation. And I just think it's just kind of ridiculous. But the larger point, there's points of her argument that I find are a little reductionist. That number one, Black people are responsible for democracy in America. Number one, America is not a democracy; it's a constitutional republic. All right. Now I know that Djene has a problem with that framing, but at the same time, I think that there are democratizing things that engage in American history through the civil rights movement that are a result of America trying to rebrand itself for various reasons we talked about here before. But my whole thing is that, like, she's talking about how Black people did this during the civil rights movement and how Black folk, and I was like, but you weren't there. Those weren't you. You know what I'm saying? He's like, you didn't march in the civil rights movement and you weren't facing being lynched. What was going on? Why exactly do you think in any way that has to do with what you've done, which is pretty much someone who is younger than I am? I know your, pale complexion behind has never drank from a segregated water fountain in your life. So it's really kind of annoying to me how I find people, in general, glom on to this kind of historical angst as if they were there. Like, no, yes, people fought a noble struggle and did great things, but that wasn't you.
That's stolen valor, right? It's a kind of stolen valor, and there is a general discourse, if you look at it today in the United States, in Great Britain as well, where there's constant references to past political struggles by people who had no concrete experience of those political struggles. Like, who today, like in Britain, whether you agree with Brexit or not, you had people framing Brexit as this like heroic struggle that we did against the Germans in the 1920s. Like, you didn't do it in the 1940s. No, none of you guys did struggle against the German, and none of you sat through the Blitz and dealt with the things like that. So I think Pascal is 100% correct on that. There's this total stolen valor as people try to bring onto themselves the perfume of the glory of a political struggle that they did not participate in, and in fact, a political struggle that they have crippled and taken off the rails through the particularities of their ideology. It is not a million miles away, if you think about it, from the way that reactionaries and conservatives talk about, well, Martin Luther King said this, Martin Luther King said that. We're just following Martin Luther King thing. Everybody is using this sort of the civil rights era to justify their present day political positions.
Very important context, Djene. Shout out to Djene Bajalan with a very, 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 Djene really inspired a very important thought in my mind with that, is that so much of our politics, whether liberal, conservative, or left, is reactionary in the purest definition of the word, in that it's stuck fetishizing the past. Many of our revolutionary nationalist leftists, or maybe our radical leftists, are stuck in either 1917, or stuck in 1972, or stuck fetishizing, the Spanish Civil War. Everyone is stuck looking at something, taking glory You know what I'm saying? There's some Haitians who are stuck in 1804. There's some Haitians who are stuck in 1946 because of the revolution of 1946. So everyone is stuck looking at the past and trying to suck glory from the past, which is the definition of reaction. And no one is talking about how do we chart a path forward to deal with this mess that
100%.
we're in right now.
And I might add to this. I know Pascal always makes fun of leftists who try and talk about the Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte and Marx. But this is a point that Marx made about bourgeois revolutionary movements, that they have to appropriate the language and costumes of the past. So, in 1848, Napoleon III appropriated the language of the French Revolution, and the French Revolution appropriated the language of ancient Rome. And the kind of takeaway was that a revolutionary movement or a forward-looking political movement needs to look towards the future and not the past. And I think we do have this very backwards-looking kind of political narrative. So I'm not saying we have to reject everything about the past or not learn from the past, but I think we do end up fetishizing a lot of things about the past, and everybody's is trying to utilize and cosplay as if they're like Pascal says, it depends on your flavor, but whether it's like 1972, 1917, or 1968, and I think that's like a big deficit, because it's as if we lack an imagination about how we could go forward.
I think that comes from, we talk about this all collectively a lot privately, that I feel like it comes from defeat, the nostalgic look back in the rear view.
I think Jason is absolutely correct. Defeat is part of it, but I also, because to be fair, it's not simply a left or liberal project. Conservatives do it too. I think defeat is not necessarily completely incorrect, though, Jason, but I actually think it comes more from an unwillingness to deal with the difficulty of the moment at hand. There are no simple answers for what's going on right now. We have a prolonged crisis of capitalism in 2008. We had this COVID phenomenon that was just abysmal. We have massive interest rates going on. We have people are literally worried about a potentiality for World War III. Everything is in flux. We have a liberal presidential administration that can't catch any traction in the face of a hardcore reactionary right that some have deemed almost fascist, and there's no legitimacy of any institution in the country.
Well, I will say this. I retweeted an article. It was really short that I read about a young lady that got arrested for murder because she had an abortion in Texas. And the reason why she was arrested was because someone had told on her, because that law is kind of a snitch law. And I think it's the state houses that are going to get in this primary. They're going to whip up the Democratic base because they are so over the top reactionary. But as we talk about the need to look back, the need for nostalgia, let's bring in our guest, who actually did some great work on an area that I actually lived in for a short time, the Bakken oil fields of North Dakota. So recently we had his co-writer on for the OK Boomer piece, Jason Mueller. Jason reached out. He thanked us for coming on the show and reached out with John's information, sent an academic article John wrote about organizing unions in the Bakken. And I was like, F it, we got to get this guy on. So please welcome Professor of Sociology at Minot State, John McCollum.
Hey, good morning, guys. Ramadan Mubarak to those who celebrate.
All right, Ramadan Kareem, thank you for the kind dispensation there, Professor McCollum. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great, guys. It's above freezing out here, middle of April. We're feeling good, man. Might bust out the grill later, Any day above freezing out here is pretty good.
Oh, I remember, and I will tell a few stories on this episode. I'll only try to tell one or two. But I'm from California. I'm from the Bay Area. It doesn't get that cold in the Bay. Never experienced freezing weather in the Bay. If you do, there's a weather warning and school is shut down. I go to North Dakota in March, and I'm wearing a denim jacket and Vans and a t-shirt because it's March. I've experienced my first whiteout. I didn't know what that was, where every highway in the state was closed.
Yep.
So I was stuck in Bismarck for a few days before I could get to Minot, where you are, to go up to Williston. And then by the time winter hit, it was negative 45. And I never seen anything that cold where like everything freezes as you walk outside. My beard was frozen. Your snot freezes.
Yep.
I would run from the dorm to the kitchen where I worked, and it was probably 10 yards, and I would always get winded. And one day an older gentleman stopped me, and he's like, "What the hell is wrong with you?" And I was like, "Oh, to wake up." I mean, it was twofold. I didn't want to deal with the drunks in the common area, and it was to wake up. You know, you step outside in negative 45-degree weather, you're awake.
Yep.
So I do this 10-yard run, and the guy goes, "If you don't cover your mouth when you run like that, you will freeze your lungs as you breathe in."
What?
Yeah.
That
And,
sounds
you know,
cold.
Jason, you talk
Oh
about
man, you just sent a shiver up my spine, and I'm in Miami.
Jason, you talk about cold, you know, and drinking. We have the highest per capita alcohol consumption of any of the 50 states. And it happens out here. You know, people get a little bit too loaded up. You hit a whiteout, or it's just that cold, it's that slippery, and people will get lost going from the bar to their car or their bar to their house, and we won't find them until spring.
Yeah.
Shout out to, this is North Dakota.
This
It's
is
North Dakota.
Yeah.
Never been. Well, John, I want to ask you a question, if you don't mind, Jason, unless you want to set it up, because I don't want to step on your toes.
No. I just real quick. I want John to, because I don't think people understand the oil fields in North Dakota. I don't think people really understand frack drilling, and I don't think people understand the oil field in general, as far as unionized labor. So when I also worked in the oil fields in the Gulf of Mexico, very non-union in that area, as you can imagine. And then going to North Dakota was no different. A lot of work is fractured. It's not what you think it is. It's not like you go work for Chevron and everyone works for Chevron. There's multiple divisions. Everything is broken down into different parties and third-party labor. A lot of labor is brought in from overseas. More labor than you think is brought in from overseas. One of the big problems with North Dakota was that they didn't have an infrastructure set up. So when you think about Texas, when you think about Sudan, when you think about Saudi Arabia, even when you think about the Gulf of Mexico, there's decades, generations in the making of building out an infrastructure on how things work, on how to be safe. Even Alaska, you know how to work safely in below freezing temperatures, right? They didn't have that in North Dakota.
And Jason, you say that I think we're behind Alaska in terms of death and injury on the job. And Alaska, you know, the big industries out there, fishing, logging, and then oil and energy. And then out here, it's ag and energy too. And a lot of people die on the job. And another thing, in the boom, the pace of work was so furious, and the desire for labor was so high. Like if somebody gets injured, just toss them out. You'll find some other, you know, working stiff who will do the job too. And then with no unions to protect anybody, and even those union formations that are out here were so busy and overwhelmed with the pace of work, the influx of new laborers out here, and then just a general lack of class consciousness and organization out here for those who were out here. You know, like I say, you know, that furious pace of work, you don't really know how. Out here, the demand for labor was so high. You know, you'd have high school graduates out here who could make $25, $30 an hour unskilled. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, you can work 100 hours a week. And so now that we're 10 years out from the boom, you know, a lot of these kids basically got out here, made a ton of money, and now they're on to a second career. And anyway, Pascal, you had questions. I'm happy to answer those. But Jason, a lot of what you're saying has been that I've uncovered in my work and what I've seen out here. It's just that now we're 10 years out from it.
Another thing I want to ask you real quick before we move on to Pascal and Djene. I'm sure they both have questions about class consciousness, which is really what this conversation is about. And I do want to add this one thing too, as we are excited about the win that someone I would call a friend, Chris Smalls, had with the Amazon labor union. We also need to keep thinking about organizing and how we can organize. So that's another reason why I thought this was just so perfect that Jason sent me your information, and we were able to have this show. Because another thing that happens in this boom, like you said, labor, Pascal, you always hear Pascal always talk about the reserve army of labor, and you really don't understand what that looks like until you go into a boom situation. So there are people, and again, there's no infrastructure. I want you guys to keep in mind there's no infrastructure that's being built at this time. So when I first got there about 2010, 2011, there was a little bit of infrastructure, but you pretty much have people staying in hotels. And Walmart in Williston, I'm talking about Williston, North Dakota. Walmart in Williston became a bit of a city, because if you couldn't find a man camp, which was like a housing for oil field workers, which is pretty much just a series of portables. If you didn't have a man camp that your company was paying for, then you were probably staying in your car or an RV. So rents get astronomically high. And it was, when I was there, it was $750 was the going rate to sleep on someone's couch in an RV at Walmart. There were multiple men paying $1,000 to sleep, like, oh, I got the doorway in this apartment building or in this hotel. That's where I get to stay. So another difference between that and the Gulf of Mexico is, in the Gulf of Mexico, any drugs or alcohol, you automatically get arrested. My second job out, I was actually on a rig that got raided by the Coast Guard.
Damn.
Because it was said that some guys had brought in some drugs, and they were steroids and cocaine. It was really weird. But that stuff is so common in North Dakota because you don't really have time to do any sort of real background checks. So we're probably not going to get into it on this episode. We might do another episode on it, but you want to talk about the level of felons, the level of dudes with bad licenses that are driving big rigs in icy weather.
Yeah.
People making meth, not only in the Walmart, but in the housing facilities. The accidents that happened, the insanity, the violence. When I said I wanted to avoid the drunkards, a lot of guys that have never left home, because again, you go where the work is. This reserve army of labor is not just something Pascal says like fatback and biscuits. It is a real thing. I don't know if people know what that looks like, but it's people that have been cut out of the workforce in very, very depressed areas that are surrounding North Dakota. Northern Idaho doesn't really have industry that's not seasonal. Northern Minnesota doesn't have industry that's not seasonal. The rest of North Dakota doesn't really have that much industry. I don't know if you guys have been to South Dakota. They don't really have that much industry. We had cats from Colorado. So you got all these cats coming to this little bitty town called Williston, North Dakota, that's off of a state route. It ain't even off of a main highway. It's just a recipe for all kinds of disaster. So I will, after painting that picture for you guys, I will let Pascal and Djene ask the really cool Marxy questions.
That was a great picture you painted. Not great, but a very good job of painting the picture. Depressing as hell, but still very good. In the light of that, John, I'd like to talk about, this might seem like a touchy subject, the difficulty of labor organizing in a profession that in a left views should be made obsolete. Yeah. In other words, the challenge of getting comrades who have the politics that require advocacy for unionization for largely men working in the energy sector, oil extraction, when a large part of left political praxis is about the demand to make that whole industry obsolete. What does that look like, and how does that work out in real politics of this industry?
Well, Pascal, one of the things that I gotta say is that there seems to be oil creates a certain kind of consciousness, right? Where it's like the solution to every social problem in an energy driven economy is drill more, right? Drill more, drill more, drill more. With Russia cutting off its gas to Europe, what's the solution? United States should drill more gas and send it up there. It's an industry, like you say, that, environmentally, you talk about climate change. One of the things that Jason did not mention has been the effects on Native Americans. One of the big Native American nations out here is the Mandan, Hidatsa, Riccara Nation, the three affiliated tribes. And that tribe has really had some serious problems with oil, the violence, crime, drugs, etc. So you say that, but I think also for a left project, you have to think about maybe not making comrades out of people out here, right? But convincing them that there is life after oil. And I'll say that I think oil and the role of oil in the state, its finances, its culture, you could even say there's a culture of oil out here. Back down in Minot, one of the liquor stores that was advertising like a branded liquor whiskey. Like people wear T-shirts here, North Dakota, you can smell the fracking money. You've got to promise people that there's life after oil. And the funny thing is I think the Dems have really really messed that up by not giving people a viable alternative, like such as they are associated with the environmental movement of what's going to come after. And, Djene, maybe you can know more about this than I do, but, there's communities in Wales that are now post-coal that the left has made some pretty good inroads in, like, what are we going to do after coal in a place that was never doing that well, right? So you have to give people some type of alternative that's viable. And moreover, it's not something like, what industrial workers were told in the United States after NAFTA, we'll learn to code. That level of contempt for the working class, it is just not going to go anywhere. And people are going to double down on what they're doing already. That's a recipe for disaster. When you say this thing should be eliminated, but you cannot provide a new viable way of life. And especially in small town America, where small farming is going the way of the dodo. There's no other alternative here, right? You have to provide something else. And in fact, oil was that something else for quite some time.
Yeah, I would say like a big difference with Wales though is that the assault on coal, which was a political assault in order to break the power of the mining unions that had dominated political life in the United Kingdom during the 1970s. That was a Thatcherite assault. So the people coming for the coal jobs were conservatives. In America, I think in terms of discourse, and perhaps you could speak, and I think you spoke to this, the assault is coming rhetorically, at least, from the Democrats. And the irony is that, it was Obama, under Obama, that all this boom was placed. But so the Democrats are, on one hand, facilitating a massive expansion in oil production. Perhaps conservatives would have done more, but, there's this huge boom taking place due to the particular policies of the Democratic Party, while at the same time, their rhetoric is meaning that they can't politically capitalize on that. So you have the word. This is why I am so skeptical of the evil genius Democrats thing, because they're just so contradictory. They can't square the circle between their discourse. And of course, the irony is the most radical wing of the Democratic Party in advocating for the Green New Deal, which is now a dirty word amongst these communities. Well, this Green New Deal was literally had provisions within it designed to to avoid what had happened in coal mining Appalachia, to transition people onto a new green economy. But the ideological battle seems to have been completely bungled and lost by the Democrats in this, and liberals more general, in general, because they view oil in a moralistic sense, that oil is bad, it's evil, and things like that. And, and sort of as they do with everything, compartmentalize every single social problem and end up, we discussed this last week with police reform. It becomes like an issue of like, how do we deal with police reform in an isolated sense? And then you can't actually deal with it because it's not an isolated issue. Just as dealing with or the oil industry is not an isolated thing just to do with, it's about, and I think Zach Exley said it very well when he came on the show, was like, we have to work out how to take apart millions of machines and put together millions of new machines in order to completely reorientate our economy. It's not just a matter of people not driving a freaking car anymore.
But Djene, I think the thing that a lot of people don't get to see because they're not in these environments, right? We talk about this a lot. You can talk about the working class, but unless you are of the working class and you sit down in these rooms, as I have for a good amount of time, and you hear what people say, we had a common area, and for the most part, the only time the channel changed was watch gun shows. This is back when the NRA still had a channel, and football. Other than that, you're watching the news. You want to know the weather report, right? You want to know what it's going to be like, and guys just watch the news. Generally, the guys were watching Fox News. It was what it was. It is just kind of the background noise as you're talking to your friends, but it was everywhere you went was news was going to be on it. It was probably going to be news of a conservative nature. And part of that news, this is the Obama years going into the second Obama election, was that Obama was some sort of socialist. So in a lot of guys' minds, this new thing they had that was the first time in their lives that they could be like their parents. Mm-hmm. Hey, I got a felony and all these kids, I can finally pay for them. I can buy a house. It was bad and it was rough, but I'm not going to sit here and lie and say I was there the whole time singing Negro spirituals with the other black dudes in the kitchen with me. We had a lot of fun, and people, for the most part, were in pretty good moods because I didn't know you could get weapons so easy. We had BB guns in the kitchen. That's a whole nother side fun story. That was a lot of fun. But people are finally prospering. But the only thing that they see as an impediment to their this new found wealth is the Democratic Party, even though the party is expanding what they're doing. That is the level that you're dealing with of conversation.
Earlier, before I came on, out here, oil is seriously associated with cultural, political status. When you could high school diploma support your family, I brought out of high school, and you need to go to the ivory tower, make you other than what other people can relate. So the nostalgia is just so strong. But they never go back, right? Mm-hmm. Williston, the county it's in, Kansas County, in the last census over 1,000%. The landscape's been totally transformed. Maybe you can back me up on this.
Yeah.
You go to places, look at it, you'll see fires all over the prairie.
No stars.
No stars.
No stars.
People really nostalgic sense. Pascal, you're from New York. This will blow your mind. When people go into Walmart, Jason, maybe a chain knows that, but you leave your car running. So that when your car doesn't stall, when you go back in, it'll be nice and warm. And so people just leave their cars on. Even here, I'm not in the oil patch proper.
Hold on, John. They're saying your audio is getting choppy. Can you maybe refresh on your end?
Yeah. Just give me 1 second. Sorry, I am on rural internet.
Yeah, hold on. So we'll let John try to fix his audio over there. He's bringing up something that's real. So while John fixes his audio and comes back in, I do want to tell this real quick story. So also you're working with a lot of guys, and I don't know if Djene and Pascal are like this, that have never lived on their own. And they've never, you could tell that they didn't know how to take care of themselves. So they didn't know how to shop. And I had never seen that before. I'd never met a grown man that didn't know how to shop. And I think, John is back with a strong signal. There he is. So John,
sorry, guys.
about how Walmart was, so they didn't know how to shop. So as we're talking about wages being high in the oil fields, that means wages are high everywhere. McDonald's couldn't keep people because if you are able-bodied, why would you make $7 an hour at McDonald's when you can go to the oil field and make $40, $50 an hour? So McDonald's started flying people in from overseas to work, paying them $20 an hour. Walmart was bringing in people paying them $20 an hour. There were signs all over Williston. If you can pump gas, we'll pay you $20 an hour to come here and pump gas. Businesses closed because they couldn't get employees because everybody wanted to go work in the oil field for money. But when these guys would go shopping, I had never seen this before. They didn't know how to buy one, like maybe if they went shopping and it wasn't there the next day, they panicked. So they would go shopping, like they'd see, oh, we need toilet paper. So they would take their arm and just knock it all into the cart. So you would see one man with 2 carts. And because we all made so much money at this time, it was not a big thing to spend $1,500 at Walmart. Every room we had came with a TV, but these a-holes would buy a bigger TV just because they could. And they had PlayStations at home they could have brought, but they bought new PlayStations because they didn't want to bring the one from home. It was silly shit.
Hey, Jason, out there in Williston, one of the biggest Lambo dealerships in the country for a while was that Lambo dealership out in Williston. So you'd have these dudes with only a high school degree. And, I'm sure they were loaded up with debt and probably got it repoed a few months after buying it. But, you'd have these guys cruising around in a Lambo on dirt roads out here, and get an ice palace to go ice fishing in, an ice house that you put on the frozen lakes, got satellite TV, got a flush toilet in it, heat, internet, everything, the works, a couple of snowmobiles, bass boat for when it is,
lost,
for when it is thawed out here.
Steve says, Hoodrich. Steve, this is a true story, and then I'm going to log off, or I'm going to turn myself off because I really want to hear Djene and Pascal ask some of these smart guy questions. We had hotel doors, so if you know, a hotel door shuts automatically. My door didn't shut one day, and I had cashed my check. I didn't have a bank account. I didn't have a bank account for like 7 years. And so I would go to Walmart, would cash your check. Anything under $3,000, they would cash at the register for you. So I didn't have to wait, just buy my groceries. Oh, here's my paycheck. Oh, no problem. So I had $1,500 sitting stacked in my room, and my door didn't shut. So anyone could have went in my room. We had no cameras, taken my $1,500. They knew what room was mine. It was no big deal. And a dude came up to me. He's like, oh, I saw your door was open, man. I shut your door. And I was like, shit. My first thought is my money's gone. I run to my room, and my money's sitting right there. Nobody touched it. And he saw it. It was like you couldn't miss it. But he didn't care because he had so much in his pocket.
Interesting. So the question becomes for me, though, right, is that those are glory days of when the industry is doing good. What happens when the industry is in decline? And how exactly do we take this type of business, energy extraction, fracking, oil industry, and how do we develop a counter-hegemonic politics around an industry that is rooted in the party of reaction, right? And I want to really kind of complicate something that Djene was talking about, how the evil genius narrative about the Democrats, in other words, that some people believe they've got it mastered. I actually don't believe what the Democrats are doing is evil genius. I believe it's intentional fecklessness. And what I mean intentional fecklessness is that I don't think the Democrats are feckless because they're incompetent. I believe they intentionally don't want to get things done at all. And the reason that they use the illusion of obstruction to deny their capacity to fulfill the demands of their constituents is that they don't want to be completely exposed as the actual caretakers of empire. Because one of the things I've said on this show before is that I've argued, and Corey Robin kind of agreed with me, is that the Democratic Party, with the rise of Clintonian Democratic Leadership Council politics, and I've mentioned that before, maybe I need to clarify that further. The Democratic Leadership Council was a consortium of Southern Democratic governors and institutional policy thinkers in the Democratic Party that started to rise around the second election of Ronald Reagan in '84. And they basically did a poll of the Democratic Party constituents, and they found that the Democratic Party was losing working class whites under the perception that they were too sympathetic to the concerns of their black constituents, which is ironic because it's not like they did anything for them anyway. And largely this comes out of the fact that you have Jesse Jackson, who runs in '84, registers something like 2 million black voters. And the overall consensus that is taken by the Democratic Party Southern governors is that the party must pivot to the right and double down on pro-corporate, pro-free market, anti-identitarian, or anti-black, poor, and working class politics. And that became the ideological foundation of the party going into Clinton. And I would also make the argument that this was done because the Democratic Party and the liberals, and Djene, I'd like to hear Djene, so I make the argument that the liberals are the innate caretakers of bourgeois democracy. In other words, even though the conservatives are the party of reaction, I would make the argument that the liberals, because the party of reaction has this, the party of reaction is not able to socially control the disaffected because their contempt is too transparent. I would argue that the liberals make the more effective caretakers of bourgeois economics and social control because of the charade of egalitarianism. Maybe I'd like to hear what you guys both think. But my basic point is that how do we create a politics for this industry in the face of all of that?
You know, Pascal, you mentioned that about the Dems as the caretakers of this thing. You know, I think it was about 2 years ago, Obama gave a talk down at Rice University in Houston, and in his classic Obama style of speech was like, fracking, that was me, folks. And then you do that, right? Opening up public land for drilling. Like a lot of the drilling that goes on out here isn't on private property. You know, it's out on federal land that he opened up and then loosened environmental regulations to let this happen. And then, you know, there's a chance, right, to make an inroad in a state where you have no vote, you don't have a big base, and you can make one, right? Well, you're not running on that. You're not mentioning that out here, right? That you brought back the jobs, you brought back the money, you know, and they're really, I think, playing for second place, right? Where you can be influential, but you know, you don't actually want to run the place, right? At least not out here in this state. And, you know, you mentioned, you know, in all those questions, Pascal, like what can we do after, right? Out here in this state, we do have something kind of interesting institutionally going on that I don't know if a lot of other states have this, and especially fracking states like Pennsylvania or maybe even down Oklahoma and Texas way, which is that we have what's called the legacy fund, where taxes on drilling and extraction go to a state, you know, sovereign wealth fund, you could call it. And in the state right now, we're having discussions about what to use it for. And there's a lot of controversy with that, one of which is that we've said, and, you know, this makes sense, right, that this money needs to be invested in the state, and it needs to be invested outside of energy in something that could be North Dakota's future. And it's, you know, it's certainly got its imperfections, but that could be like a capital stock, right, to use that into something else, whether that be green technology, whether that just be the knowledge economy. I'm sorry, I sound like a Peter Thiel guy here for a second, but, you know, diversifying the economy and getting into something else. And I've actually been really surprised at how responsible in public meetings that were occurring just at the beginning and a little bit before COVID on using this money for things like buying every North Dakota school child's lunches, something like that type of social spending. So I see that as maybe a way forward to decarbonize. The irony is that the economy out here is just so conservative, American individualism. Hard to see that really being part of some big class project, but it's kind of a way forward, right, to both achieve decarbonization and move us towards some other type of social and economic basis. So that's the way I see it.
I have a couple of I have a response to Pascal and also a very specific question about class itself in North Dakota and particularly with the oil fields. I mean, my thought on what Pascal said, I would say, for both the Republicans and the Democrats, the establishment factions at the very least are liberals, different variety of liberals, but ultimately they subscribe to a liberal worldview on economics and politics and things like that. And I would kind of have a different take from Pascal on the problem the Democrats have is I think they are more credulous with their ideology. I think they're more imprisoned by by liberalism and their genuine belief in process institutions. Hence, they weren't particularly on the ball, for example, when it came to the judicial system, or when they get outflanked politically because they are sort of playing according to a set of ideological rules that limits, that they think they're very smart for doing, but actually it limits their room for political maneuver. Whereas the conservative wing of the Republican Party, which is increasingly in ascent, is not beholden to economic liberalism. It's more conservative in the social sense, and is far more pragmatic in selling away so-called principles. If talking about the constitutionality of something serves their political purpose, they will emphasize its constitutionality. If that goes against their political objectives, they will just completely ignore it. So they're far more effective politically in that they aren't beholden to sort of any ideological scaffolding, which makes them politically more supple and more able to act in a way to respond to changing public conditions in order to sort of help capital, if that's their ultimate objective. And I think Democrats are far more credulous. A lot of them come from these like Ivy universities. They believe in the process, they believe in the system, and they constantly get outflanked and outmaneuvered by a more effective, a more politically astute wing of politics. Liberals are the smartest idiots in American politics. Right? When it comes to my specific question for John, I want to ask you about, what kind of discourse exists surrounding class, and how do you view class, in almost in a theoretical sense, in that, obviously, even within the Marxist tradition, there is a discussion and debate between our understandings of class as a objective reality in terms of how people relate to the means of production and the social relations of production. But then also there is a subjective understanding of class, and a class in itself and a class for itself. What sense of class consciousness exists in amongst these oil workers and more broadly within North Dakota? How is that discourse of class constituted? Is it seen as cultural as opposed to today? And what other competing discourses, for example, discourses of citizenship, the people, how do those fit into it? Or even racial solidarity, how do all those things fit into the concept of class in how it is practiced actually in North Dakota?
So, Djene, I think you've thrown out a lot of things that I think your head is really where my head's at on this. So I'll give you a little bit of North Dakota history here, that different ways of understanding class and organizing it epistemologically that aren't explicitly capital V labor is historically what has happened in North Dakota. But the irony here is that we are a state with a long socialist legacy. So Minot, for instance, Arthur LeSueur was the first socialist mayor ever elected anywhere in the United States. We have a few socialist traits to the state government here. So, for instance, we have a state bank that no other state has. We have a state grain elevator that in very low ag prices, in periods of very low agricultural prices, gave farmers a lot of price support. Again, I mentioned the legacy fund. You know, we have tax dollars flowing to this fund for development. However, a lot of the rhetoric around the original Socialist Party and then what occurred after it began to fall apart in the late 19 teens, early 1920s, in the rise of the nonpartisan league, class was understood as the rural working class versus the urban banks. And so the State Bank of North Dakota, the rhetoric behind it was, we got to cut out these fat cats in St. Paul, Minnesota, and all the way in New York. We, the rural area, the small farmers, we're the real working class. I don't think necessarily there was like a slam on, you know, the urban proletariat, but that's not class, right? A lot of the nonpartisan league and the Socialist Party was actually about protecting small farming and protecting small business ownership as sort of the real working class, right? That has certain respectable cultural traits. Fast forward to today, that you see a similar rhetoric, right? And particularly surrounding Trump and then oil especially. Those Democrats out there, and often our Republicans have a fixation on Minnesota. If you want to do well as a Republican, make sure you slam Ilhan Omar in all of your materials, right? You know, when you need to do a little bit of dog whistling, you got to mention, you know, immigrants in Minneapolis. There's just not a huge number of them out here. So it's us versus them again. But when the NPL and the populists and the Socialist Party were really organizing and were big out here, it sort of fit, right? There really was capital and banks in the cities of the East that were, you know, giving farmers really high interest rates. They were really making small farming hard. And so these institutions rose up as sort of this like democratization of the economy that now doesn't really fit. However, the right is really good out here at appropriating left-wing aesthetics, left-wing rhetoric, right? It's us v. them. It's the people versus the politicians, but it doesn't come down in a capital versus labor type of mentality. And, you know, from what Jason said earlier, you know, people out here view oil as a godsend. And so even the barest association of the Democratic Party with the environmental movement, people see that as threatening. And so, you know, also a lot of people out here are above the daily grind of poverty. They're above the daily grind of uncertainty, thanks to the high wages out here. Now, of course, they're lots of times doing this by working 100 hours a week out in the oil field, right? But here come these Democrats who, again, are environmental failures. They're class failures who aren't really out there for the people, much less the working class. But the rhetoric is so strong out here and it's so hegemonic. And not to mention, like, what is the alternative? What are the Democrats promising people out here, much less in the rest of America? And I think that it's generally a lesson for the rest of rural America. In non-oil rural America, you know, what are the Dems going to do for small communities out here? And of course, you know, we're all here, you know, class analysts and materialists. You know, there's still a lot of class exploitation out here. You know, just because you make $15 an hour, $25 an hour at Mickey D's or Walmart out here doesn't free you up from a lot of the daily degradations and humiliations of being working class in America.
And that's something that people don't really understand when we talk about class and class consciousness, and the fact that just because you make, and you literally do make, because Minot was the big city from where Williston is and Dickinson and all these other places. That's where the mall is in Minot and a larger airport. It's a little cheaper to fly into Minot. When I was flying into Williston, it was between $1,000 and $800 for one way. and there's more direct lines into where John is, but there still is a lot of people that make $25 to $30 an hour doing things that, you know, we always talk about. We need to raise the minimum wage. It's not like you get treated better. You get treated way worse. If you make $20 at McDonald's, that means the guy walking in the door probably makes $50 an hour, and he's going to be an asshole just because.
And Jason, you mentioned this too, like, you know, paying $750 a month to live on a couch, you know, net of a class understanding of the way society works. You know, if you can't get the other side of the equation, right? If you can't get the other side of the equation, that property owners, public housing, some type of housing alternative out here, rent control, they are going to get your high wage back in their pocket.
Right.
Yeah. And I remember the city didn't want to build out.
Yep. And actually, Minot is full of empty hotels.
Now.
Because during the height of the boom with city zoning, you know, a lot of people wanted, you know, housing for these guys. You would be really surprised. Like out here, it was like, we have to get our oil workers housing. And with, you know, the way priorities worked and the corporate power of hotels, which is like, you know, maybe not the biggest, most damaging front of capital, they got these big hotels that are now sitting empty rather than housing for the working class. Go ahead, Pascal. Sorry.
Well, let me ask you a question then. Are we making the argument that perhaps Lenin was wrong in his pamphlet, Left Communism, that the need to organize the reactionary conservative unions should not be something given up by the left? And maybe the Frankfurt School and Marcuse and maybe Althusser are correct in that the working class, once it's satiated with a quality wage, is too reactionary to be mobilized.
Pascal, I'll double down on my study talking about
Ooh.
it.
You ready to double down on that?
I'm ready to double down on that, man.
Shit.
Out here, you know, when I was talking to these guys, and keep in mind, this is like your labor aristocracy, right?
Mhm.
I talked to some guys, you know, it's a small place, y'all. They can find me, you know, you can probably find them. So I got to be a little bit cagey about what I say about who. But one of these guys in one of these trades, they can make $100 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And I, you know, in the course of these interviews, I'd ask guys, you know, what's the relationship with management? Do you guys get along? You know, do you like each other? Do you have a lot of conflict at work? If so, what's it about? And then, you know, they'd tell me like, you know, we all like to sit down like gentlemen. You know, we don't like to confront. Everybody wants to get together, you know, but then what they do is like outside the interview, they tell me something like one of these unions, a guy got trapped in a tube. And the tube began to fill with steam, and the guy got boiled alive, basically. And it's like, that's why they make $100 an hour. And so this guy in the same convo says, yeah, we get along here. There's no issue. And then they'd be like, yeah, we just had a guy die on the job. They'd, you know, tell me like, oh yeah, you know, I talked to a union steward, and he'd be like, yeah, I just got a call. You know, we got some asshole contractor that doesn't want to use union labor. They're not respecting the tools, right? You know, rather than use a union guy, they'll go with a non-union guy, which, you know, the union doesn't like naturally. And then they'd be like, yeah, we get along fine with management. The issues are still there, even in an industry where you're getting really well paid, but they don't think that way. They like to imagine that union labor and management get along fine. And then in the same conversation, they'll tell you they don't get along.
So would you say that, I mean, but isn't that like the nature of the labor aristocracy in and of itself? I mean, the labor aristocracy is under the hegemony of bourgeois aspirations and bourgeois culture. And so there's a contradiction between the concrete reality of their relationship with management and the adherence and buying into the ideology, you know, bourgeois social ideology that they can, that class collaboration, they can work together, their bosses respect them. And that's one issue. And the other issue, if we take it on a global level, again, let's go back and talk about Lenin. What he talks about in imperialism is the fact that you have a pampered American working class that can earn $100 an hour and thus has a vested interest, despite its exploitation, in being better than people in other parts of the world. And this is a perennial problem. You go to, you know, Lenin in 1920 when they were discussing the national question. The English delegates in the Soviet Union were like, well, if you go against like England's wars, the working class will be against you. So on a broader sense, they buy into the middle class aspirations of the American dream of working hard, and at the same time buy into American nationalism, that they're in the greatest country in the world and they're better than the people outside of it.
I think the perfect manifestation of that is the Nixon era Hard Hat Rebellion, the Hard Hat Riot.
Mm-hmm.
And Djene, to your comments, one of the things is that like these high wages are a problem, right? It's a sort of like human capital. These are unique jobs held by a few people. That market's not big, for one. However, it is under threat. So, for instance, the Trump administration was going to take normally one of the ways that the trades have such power is their ability to corner the specific training that you need. Mm-hmm. So let's say to be an electrician, you got to go to IBEW electrician school. To be an operator and join the operators union, you got to go to operator school to learn how to use this equipment. Well, the Trump admin was going to allow privatized trade schools. Essentially would be like a privatized university, right? Where you pay money to go, it's run by a for-profit corporation, and they were going to allow that, which would be a pretty big detriment. Some of the unions realized this, that actually as a labor aristocracy, they actually kind of need a mass line. I guess I maybe should use that kind of term a little cautiously, but they also did a lot of respectability games, right? That one of the things I would always ask them is, okay, tell me about yourself, tell me how you joined the union, etc. And, they all talked about respectability. So Jason, you mentioned guys with felonies and like a long stack of felonies, long stack of addiction, history of addiction, etc. You could get a nice high paying job out here. Thing is, that's playing respectability games, right? Like millions of Americans have felony convictions. Millions of Americans are on something. And by making those types of boundaries between themselves and the rest of the working class, they're kind of signing their own death warrant, at least for that high wage respectability. So they found out, maybe we actually got to do something about this. And I don't think it'll be too big of a surprise, just pure logic games, that it's the smaller unions that realize that a bit more. It's the ones that are most vulnerable to de-skilling that realize that. And so, they are reacting to this degradation of their privileged position. We'll see where it goes. One of the things, it may just boost up their power, and then they'll forget about their more lumpen pro wing when it's convenient to do so.
Yeah, I would say the Teamsters definitely were trying to snatch anybody they possibly could. I remember being there. You see guys when they first get there, they're shaking because they haven't been clean for that long. They stopped drinking for the first time, so they got the shakes real bad. And then you see them like after they get a paycheck, and they're hella loose because they can get sauced again. It was wild seeing stuff like that happen. So I definitely figured it was happening with the Teamsters, and also how many trucks overturned on that highway. I mean, Jesus Christ!
You ask people out here. One of the biggest, kind of cultural, social memories of the boom. One was the rise in addiction, the rise in violent crime. A place where people leave their front doors unlocked. But the other was all the traffic accidents. You'd have drivers driving 100 hours a week. They'd be exhausted at the wheel. No-dos and even some other types of drugs that only keep you going so far before you collapse. And it was really devastating out here. Especially for people having those twin high aspirations that oil is going to save the local community, coupled by, man, there's some really downsides to this. It's hard for people to reconcile those two ideas at once.
Is it bouncing back now, though? Because obviously, with the whole Russia stuff, we've been through, you look at the places dependent on oil, it's been a disaster since 2014. And I will tell you that I was in the place where it was the worst. It's not a coincidence that ISIS conquered large parts of Iraq just as the oil price suddenly dipped low. Like this dip in price of your country or your region is dependent on it is absolutely devastating. But of course, we're moving into a phase where, this is another great irony of the Biden administration. Big protests for for like less cops, we get more cops. Healthcare, we don't get any more. We want to get a pandemic, we get no extra healthcare, not even the public option. And now, after all this chitter chatter about super being green and everything, looks like we're going to go into a phase triggered by the Democrats, or like the executed by the Democrats, to expand oil production. So
More
what?
oil production. Yeah, Biden says that COP 26. Biden said that.
Yeah.
I do have a question for Djene and for John, and maybe Pascal knows about this. John, you mentioned in your writing that there were a few revolutions around oil, and you named the overthrow of the Shah in Iran, and you named another one that I can't. Norway.
Well, for one, yeah. Well, how is social democracy run up there? It's because they got all this oil money. Certainly with a lot of problems with social democracy, some limits to it, and the ecological problems. But another one is Mexican politics.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the role of oil in the Mexican Revolution. And I believe it was President Cardenas coming up with that really innovative plan to take average everyday Mexicans' donations, basically, to buy out the oil industry. And it gave people this real sense that the oil is for the people. And there's nothing inherent about fossil fuel workers that they're just so reactionary. And, coal and oil, I guess, are two different types of labor regimes to run them. But there's no reason these oil workers just in and of themselves ontologically are these horrible reactionaries.
Mm.
And, I think in the way oil has run out here, you turn back the clock, things could have been different. I feel lucky that we have the sovereign wealth fund that we do, which, by the way, is kind of modeled on Norway's. A lot of North Dakotans are of Norwegian descent, and y'all would be really surprised, like how much you see. Oh, back in the homeland they do this. Yeah, there's a certain like nostalgia for like, well, yeah, that's what the Norwegians do, so that's what we should do. And the few social democratic things that we have is a lot of because of, the tie to the homeland that I can't say like Texas and Oklahoma can really claim to have. But there's just no reason they can't be organized, I feel. Especially given that, they have all the same issues that class brings, living in this capitalist class-based society. Why not? Why not send somebody out here?
So, this is a really, really fascinating kind of conversation we're having here, right? Because at a basic bottom line, and by the way, anyone who knows me, I'm a strong advocate of unions. I'm a strong advocate of unions for a variety of reasons. I'm a product of a union household. My mom was a lifelong member of the 1199 Nurses Union. So I am generally pro-union as a means of ameliorating the economic oppression, extraction of the working class in the capitalist society. At the same time, right, unionism is a reformist policy demand. It is reformist by nature, right? Realizing that, how exactly do we, as a left project, do we advocate unionism and maintain the ideological superstructure amongst the union movement to challenge the power of capital when we have such a long history of the labor aristocracy completely capitulating to the liberal bourgeoisie or sometimes even the conservative bourgeoisie? What are the steps that need to be taken to bring back the radical energy to union labor and the union movement?
I tell you, I don't look out here to the skilled unions for that future. Really, like Pascal, towards like a revolutionary and let's just say a revolutionary future. I don't really look to the craft unions to do that. They're not a vehicle for mass organizing. What I really see their role in any type of major change is to the degree they can be neutralized and pushed. Again, I don't see them being the vehicle forward. I really see it being the unskilled, right? The unskilled who really, their vision of the future and what it could be isn't, how big of a house do you have, right? Or I have a small house, I want a bigger one, right? Like so many craft unions and so many of the labor aristocracy say, right? I see it in that grouping as a formation that wants to radically change society. So, Pascal, I got to agree with you. I don't see them as a mass vehicle. That's such a huge change. I do see them as a resource. I do see them as building up maybe an economic base that allows people to undertake riskier actions. You know, let's say long strikes, right? You know, I'd love to see one of these big national unions turn over its strike fund towards something like an Amazon workers union, right? That's really there in what is rapidly becoming the logistics network of the United States, which is the single Amazon corporation. So that's what I see. Like I say, it could be useful. I just don't see it as a mass vehicle. And that is a guy who, like you, Pascal, is very supportive of them.
I would add to that. I just want to add to that. I think it's important to note that you mentioned the other revolutions where these oil unions have been critical. We have the Marxist emphasis on the working class is not a moral emphasis, right? Whether these people are good people or bad people, or behave nicely or don't behave nicely, is really an irrelevant question. When the liberals in the 1905 Russian Revolution came face to face with the working class, who were the shock troops of their bourgeois revolution, they didn't like them very much. They were rude. Maybe people don't like the lifestyle choices of working class people. The point about the working class is that they are, at least if you are a Marxist or you buy into Marxist theory, the only potential agents who can defeat capital, right? It's not going to be the students. It's not going to be the minorities. It's not going to be the peasantry, because the peasantry doesn't even exist anymore. The working class is the only one that has capital by, as we say in England, the ghoulies, and can strike them, where it hurts and threaten the system. There's a reason, for example, the most powerful union in England today is the train union, because like if you're a rich guy in London, you want to get across London, you better bloody hope that the underground train is working, because it doesn't matter unless you have a helicopter, if the tubes are on strike, you're not getting across town. So so this is not even a moral argument, right? Like getting these people on board is like a prerequisite to, if you believe in revolutionary change, and I'm not making an argument for or against it, I'm just saying if you believe in revolutionary change, at the very least neutralizing or bringing these people on board is a prerequisite to any kind of change. Even reform, to a certain degree, requires these people, because these are the people who put the fear of God and the EBGBs into people. When we look at social progress in the past, especially in the Great Compression era in America, it was social pressure from below, from unions, and the external threat of the Soviet model that forced the ruling classes into making concessions. And at the moment, we're totally cucked.
Well, and so, sorry, Pascal, just one more thing. You could imagine how powerful a really revolutionary working class could be here, given the absolute necessity, U.S. society especially, but certainly everybody else in the world, the need for hydrocarbons, and especially need to have them be cheap and plentiful to subsidize capital both here and all over the world. You could imagine how powerful that could be. Mm-hmm. However, I just think the nature of the labor out here, and then, people have said here in the chat, what is it like now? A lot of it now, the infrastructure's in. The infrastructure's in. The boom, at least in terms of labor, has largely crested. There's still a lot of people out here working. There's still a lot of pumping going on. However, the absolute hand over hand cycling of capital, it's kind of leveled off. Turns out that on rural communities out here, a lot of the people did stay. There was a big fear that people would rush into the Bakken, make their money, and leave. but it did largely level out. But you might imagine like a revolutionary working class right there at the point of production. It can't be outsourced. It can't be offshored. It's got to happen right here. And I just don't see that right now. But in some ways, I think it gives me a lot of hope for the environmental left. If an environmental left could associate itself with the labor movement to really act as a choke point on the production and flow of energy through society, that could be really something.
Well, I want to address this. We're saying that, the left of Marxian focus on the working class is about the fact that they are the most able to threaten capital. Well, how exactly has that worked out? Has been the opposite, because one of the natures of the working class is that they depend on capital. So when we say threaten, we say threaten in the ends of getting concessions from, not in the ends of destroying. And so my position is that it depends on what exactly your overall left project is. Is your left project basically to reify a form of capitalism where we just have a larger percent of people having more comfortable jobs, and as we'd have fewer people who are being economically extracted? Because that's what the conservatives tell you will be great for capitalism. But what we have seen in the last 50 to 200 years of capitalism is that the internal conflicts of capitalism always render the fact that labor is rendered to redundancy more and more, increased precarity, jobs become more scarce, and let's not forget the role of technology in labor obsolescence. When in that same time, labor is still in the reform polls where they're just trying to extract more concessions from capital, as opposed to revolutionarily changing capital overall in its own nature. So I'm not saying that we should abandon working with the working class, and I'm not saying that we should abandon unions either, but I'm also saying that the concerns of people like the Frankfurt School, like Marcuse, like even Lenin in his article, left communism, like Rosa Luxemburg, if you will, that there is a problem with the reactionary posture labor develops under satiation. That's an absolute fact, because they actually become oftentimes a weapon of capital to neutralize more radical demands from those who may not be working class, but may be lumpen, maybe minorities, maybe people of color, maybe a few other areas as well. So my goal is not to diminish the importance of focusing on the working class, but my goal is also to develop a realpolitik in terms of dealing with these people in these institutions and how they are used and weaponized by capital to neutralize more radical demands.
Do you guys all think it's as simple as the first step being education?
I think political education is the key always.
I mean, it really comes down to, the question of ideology, right? Class conscious. I mean, the old, let's say, Orthodox Soviet Marxist schemata of class consciousness was mechanistic in the sense that it viewed class consciousness to automatically sort of come out of the existing conditions of the working class as objectively exploited. And hence served a political narrative in the Soviet Union that said our historical victory is inevitable because exploitation will breed the consciousness we need in order to overthrow capitalism. And this was not just this mechanistic reading of class consciousness was not just an issue in the Soviet era, but in the Second International as well. A whole lot of writing, which Lenin, for example, was critical of, and Rosa Luxemburg was critical of, viewed change as being inevitable. Capitalism, you can read certain aspects of Marx in that way to say that, this is just going to happen automatically. But as, Pascal says, political education matters. And for Lenin, obviously the vehicle was the Revolutionary Party that would, bring together a coalition that could overthrow capitalism. And if you look at successful revolutions around the world, both communist and non-communist, they have been built on successful coalitions of multiple social strata and classes working together. Mao Zedong, for example, whatever you think of Mao, like he understood the urban strategy was done, and they had to find a new strategy, which was the rural strategy, and otherwise they had to just go home and pack up, right? It is a subjective battle for groups to get to consciousness. There's no automatic response to exploitation. People can react in different ways. You can be bullied at school and be against bullies, or you can become a bully yourself, right? So you have to have the question of education. If you have a political project, you have to win people over to that political project. I had an old socialist friend who used to say, when people asked him, when do you think socialism will happen? He goes, when the majority of the working class has been won over to the position of socialism and not before, which is a truism, but makes sense because, you just cannot rely automatically. People around the world are brutally exploited, but they react to that in different ways. And I'm not a moral or cultural relativist. I don't think all ways are equally legitimate or right. I don't think the response to America attacking your country, like in Iraq, is to become ISIS and start chopping the heads off anyone who doesn't conform to your particular Takfiri brand of Islam. I understand why that happens. It's a result of very brutal exploitation and oppression. So we need to be bold in our political formations, I guess. And as Pascal says, and he repeats it over and over again, political education. And I think people don't quite understand why that is significant, because you have to sell your political project if you have one.
And I really appreciate the input everyone's sharing here, right? But sometimes I step back and I'm like, we're talking at a high level of, we're talking about reformism, revolutionary, mobilizing unions, the reactionary nature of unions. We're talking about the Frankfurt School, Marcuse, we're talking about Lenin, we're talking about Rosa Luxemburg. And I'm realizing that, we're having this conversation, right? But I'm also realizing that 10 years ago, we would be talking about, for maybe 20 years ago, we would be talking about which Democrat we would hope would beat the Republicans.
I don't think the political discussion ever changes. I think what happens is, if your political discussion is based around what you're consuming, that's going to drive the discussion. So again, if you're watching a lot of mainstream media, that's driving your discussion. So if I'm trying to have this level of conversation, and keep in mind, my last time working in North Dakota, there was a few militia people that were there from northern Montana, and I was trying to get them to, they loved watching the gun channel, and they were a little racist-y at times, but didn't see themselves as such. And in watching as much NRA TV as I watched while I was there, it reminded me of hood movies. There's a lot of similarities. It's basically, you're protecting yourself and your turf. So you oversimplify the conversation. And it's like, hey, you guys remind me of the same dudes in the hood. And they were like, no, those people are different. Well, how? You have weapons, right? Yeah. What are the weapons for? To protect my family. Well, what do you think their weapons are for? is to protect their families and their friends. But it's different. Well, how? How is it different? Do you bust shots on people that walk on your land? Goddamn right. What do you think they do? What is the difference? You can have conversations. It's just there's not a lot of people like us that are in these environments. It's a lot easier to pontificate on the working class than move a goddamn box at Amazon.
Hey, speaking of that, we are getting an Amazon distribution center over in Fargo.
Congratulations.
Thanks. It's going to bring a ton of jobs, wages that we desperately need in a state with, the lowest unemployment in the country. But
well, someone who, even though I have petite bourgeois education, has worked a large number of shit jobs, particularly in factories, moving boxes, moving washing machines, as well as fast food, as well as a bunch of other crap. I can definitely tell you there's a big difference between pontificating about working class issues and having to do that crap for 8 hours a day, without a doubt. But the conundrum becomes, and my point is that I wasn't trying to complain about the fact that 20 years ago we wouldn't be having these conversations. The problem I have is that we're just having these conversations, and how exactly are we going to get people of our cohort to realize that we have to go and rent out a gym in our local area, whether it's the hood or whether it's North Dakota, and start talking to people about what exactly they can demand to improve their quality of life.
Well, and Pascal, I'll say something, this study I did may say otherwise, but living out here, class consciousness isn't dead out here. You mentioned, Pascal, your mom was a nurse, a unionized nurse.
That's right.
National Nurses United's big out here. And we have a lot of Filipino nurses come over here. You're kind of trapped, right? Wherever you get that work visa out here. National Nurses United is organizing them. We've seen across the country in red states, West Virginia, Kentucky, Arizona, teachers getting organized. Teaching's big out here. People love and respect the teachers who have these degrees but come out to this place. And I just think, like you say, political education being so prominent, this is a place that has all the same trappings of class inequality, class domination, the social effects of such a system. They're out here. And I'm not telling every socialist in the country to drive out to Williston, but they've got a place out here, and the state is changing. Nothing is stagnant about capital, right? Fargo and Grand Forks are the growth centers of the state. The patch, the Bakken oil patch, has exploded in population, but by and large, North Dakotans are heading to the cities just like everybody else on planet Earth. They're heading to the cities. They're finding poverty. They're finding high rent. They're finding police brutality. We've had some cases of that in Grand Forks and Fargo. Neoliberalism hitting the state hard. Student debt's a big deal out here, just as it is everywhere else. I could tell you as a state employee, we're getting the shaft. State employees really got left out of the Bakken oil boom, where we didn't get a big bump in our pay. We took a cut like everybody else. Year on year, inflation eating into our salaries. And if you were working for the state, you got hit by the high rents, but getting none of the boost in pay. And in rural areas, y'all, it's just so hegemonic to flip on NRA TV. It's so hegemonic to flip on Fox News. And y'all, in the trade war with China, farmers out here planted soy. They were ready to sell into the Chinese market. And here comes the trade war. And U.S. Highway 2 is paralleled a lot of its length by what we call the High Line, railway running from St. Paul, Minnesota, all the way out to Seattle. And all along the highway, you'd see cars full of soybeans sitting off the tracks. And people got hit really hard by the trade war. But you know what they said? And this is some ideology for you. They said, well, Trump talks about farmers.
Wow.
Well,
Just
when you're not getting anything else from the other side, it just becomes down to an aesthetic choice. Who do I feel like I would like to have a beer with more? Because, I think one of the things people and I wasn't in America at the time, so perhaps Pascal, Jason, and John can speak to this. I bet there was a fair few people, and I met people. I met people who were Republicans who in 2008 were like, I'm not like a huge fan of black people. I'm a Republican, but I'm going to vote Obama because I kind of want to have that free healthcare, right? And when that free healthcare didn't come, it's like, well, I don't like black people, so I kind of want a normal president.
Well, that N-word lied. And I think we also have to keep in mind that a lot of things happened during the Obama presidency. And one big thing, as we're talking about oil, is the BP oil spill. And that devastated the Gulf of Mexico. That devastated all the industries that surround the Gulf of Mexico. BP paid out billions of dollars, and not everybody got paid. A friend of mine, actually, who was a diver, finally got a check, I think it was last year, from the BP oil spill. And that's 2010. And that check didn't get his life right for the last 10 years. Right. So I don't really think people really understand the pushback that the Obama administration got in certain areas of the South. Like I really, really would feel it in 2012 when I was touring in the South. People really hated Obama because they did feel cheated because of the oversimplification of what Obamacare was going to be and what was the constant conversation on the news. This can't be like Canada. Canada is overrun with cases. It takes you months and months and months to see a doctor in Canada, and that's what the U.S. is going to be. And as some people found out, sure as hell ain't like Canada because you don't pay for shit like you do here in Canada. And thank you, Chico.
You end up waiting in the queue anyway here. You know what I mean? If you're in a rural district and they don't have a specialist, they have one specialist. You can wait your ass off. Even in New York City, I'm sure if you have good enough insurance, you can get seen pretty quickly because there's a critical mass of medical professionals there who are. My dad was telling me one of his friends was a lot of my dad's friends are retired medical doctors. Some of his cohort went to America, some went to Britain like him. And he was telling me one of his friends was selling his business as a medical clinic on the grounds that it would be a seven-figure job. So much money if you go to the right place. America distributes healthcare according to market forces, which means you end up with waiting lists in areas where the market doesn't create enough demand for particular things. And also, if you're poor, you've got a waiting list. It's called waiting until you die of the thing that you can't get seen to because you don't have money. So, all systems of healthcare have their problems with them. But for example, the NHS, at least it is rationed according to need, right? Like you're not that sick. You can suck it up and for 3 weeks and wait. You're really sick. We'll get to you first. That's a better system than who can pay the most. And
no, that's like, do I call an ambulance or not? Because I don't want to get hit with the bill.
I don't trust doctors. I don't trust doctors in America because I don't know if they're like, it takes me such a long time to trust them because I don't know if they're telling me what I need to know or they're trying to upsell me on something, right?
Doctors as car salesman isn't your thing? You went to the wrong country, brother. I do want to read this super chat from Chica O. I hope I'm saying the name right. Why do leftists get giddy about NBA lockouts, strike threats? Like John suggested earlier, the income of members also impacts what they struggle for. I can't speak for everyone. I will say sports strikes, in my opinion, are a great way to get an overall conversation about labor because I think an overall conversation about labor is definitely missing. We talk about Amazon, we talk about Starbucks, but we don't really talk about labor per se and labor power. And a good way to kind of introduce people to understanding labor power is sports strikes because it's going to be in the mainstream media. That's one reason why I like seeing those things.
The left media people, they all like sports, so they want to try and talk to a sports star.
I don't know how true that is. I feel like we're some of the few people that actually like sports. What do you think, Pascal, about that?
I think that's a very good point, man. I think that anytime we're talking about labor, union, or negotiations, it gives an opportunity for political education, and it demonstrates a point of contradiction within the system that, if you heighten it well, can perhaps get people to understand what these things are really about. I think your point is absolutely very salient and correct.
So I wouldn't downplay those discussions, but I think what happens is those discussions go, and this is also something that you can take from these. When this discussion goes to, well, this is just millionaires complaining, that's really when you should jump in and start dissecting the labor part of the conversation about.
Yeah, I think we do mix up. We do mix up a discourse about the poor versus the rich, and labor versus capital, because those things are not synonymous. There's a whole lot of vocabulary which get used and thrown around, which from, again, if you want to do class politics, from a class politics perspective, confuses the issue, right? And the way that certain terminology get used, and I think John spoke to this, when you go to North Dakota, whether you're in Springfield, Missouri, when people talk about working class, they're often talking about a cultural formation in their mind, right? They're not talking about labor versus capital. Somebody who is making, $150,000 a year doing plumbing is working class, has his own company doing plumbing, is seen as working class, whereas the Latin American cleaner in the high school is not seen as working class in the same way. So often, and this is the sneaky trick the political right plays, is that it appropriates that language and it says things, and then you have these dumbasses on the left, like these like kind of the what you call it, the post left types, and these type of people who are like, oh, actually, it's the conservatives who are the real ones who care about the working classes. No, you dumbasses, right? You don't realize, like, these guys are using this terminology in a different way. And then all these post-left intellectual types who, like, we can critique the mainstream left for liquidating itself into the Democratic Party, but like liquidating yourself into the Republican Party isn't any better. And so these people end up saying, like, Trump's actually the working class guy, because these punks haven't met a working class person and have not actually spent any time in any working class part of the country. I'm totally post middle class, not gonna lie about that, but I have lived in places which are predominantly working class. In England, I was brought up in Hull, which is a predominantly working class and lumpen city. And in America, I live in Springfield, which again is like a Midwest city. And these, just you have these ignorant, like, kind of liberal types who look down on the rest of the country. You have this contrarian discourse, which fetishizes, like the petty bourgeois culture, and confuses that for what is the working class in those regions. I don't know, John, if you see that same tendency, but I think I see that tendency.
Yeah, like, you'll have somebody come out here, wanting to run for Senate, making stops at all the little small towns, and you've got your Carhartt, big tough Carhartt jacket on, and that's like all it takes, to convince people that you're working class. Like, you don't even make a material demand on this person, and that's all. Hence the need for education, right? Like, if that's it, like, you come with any type of program, you are going to make inroads. I'm not saying you're going to make the North Dakota Soviet by actually telling people you've got some you've got some plan here, but like, that's it. When all you've got to do is put on a Carhartt jacket, the price tag still attached, to convince people that you're working class. If that's it, man, like, and you're the Dems, prepare yourself for defeat.
Someone says that Mike Rowe shit. Yeah, that Mike Rowe shit. The idea that you're working class because you speak to people that get dirty, I think is
They
rather.
even fake their accents. Anyone go around, baby, I can talk like this too. I'm a working class guy from the South. Blah, blah, blah. You have all these people. It's like Josh Hawley. You know, is Josh Hawley the vanguard of the proletariat? No, man. He's like a posh kid from outside of Princeton. Yeah, who went to a private school in Kansas City suburbs, and then went to the Ivy Leagues. Exactly. But go ahead.
Well, Jane, I was going to tell you one other thing is, these like socialist legacy programs we have out here, like the state bank, the state grain elevator, all this stuff. The conservatives won't touch it. All their agenda, legislative, social, whatever, the few working class concessions we've got out here, they don't touch them. Granted, a lot of those have become for a small, subsection of the working class, if you want to call them that. I'm not sure where you guys put small farmers in the grid of property relations and social class, but a lot of those now support them. Still, conservatives don't touch it. We have laws in the state that farms can't be corporate. They have to be on individual and traced that way. It also means when farms go into default, in the 80s out here, it's not easy for them to take under foreclosure.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that is, but they slap the capitalism. But the conservatives, they have things that they won't do, and that's one of them. Sorry, everybody, my is that again?
Oh, that
might be.
I can hear you. I can hear you. It'll sound better on the audio only podcast. It'll come out on Wednesday.
I think that's a really interesting point, by the way. And I think, especially when we think of the rural situation in the United States, I mean, I guess like if you own your own farm and you do like borderline subsistence farming, it's petty bourgeois, obviously. But at the same time, it's like you can't have a movement that is just purely, you have to build a broad movement. And that's exactly just as you want to get like intellectuals and other groups into your movement. Those are a group that may have down the line some divergent interests, but in the immediate thing, they have the same problems as everybody, as the vast majority of the working class. I think building a class coalition is an important thing to do. I don't want people to get the impression I was like, the working class, the industrial proletariat is the only vehicle for only people who can be involved in the movement. I think you'll need to get build a big coalition. And I think in rural America, you've got the rural proletariat and you've got like small farmers who have a lot of common interests, at least in the short and medium term, that can be used against the, tyranny of finance capital that exists across large parts of America. I don't know.
Well, and hey, okay. Sorry. I'll add one more. In a left project, like, one of the things about is food stamp.
Mm-hmm.
Getting everyone healthy, sustaining food is environment sustainable. And they aren't willing to at least engage with America. Like, how are we going to do that? In a very material way, like how are we going to feed everybody, do so equitably and sustainably? And again, if you're not going to go into the rural areas and organize that, or at least think about it in the class contradictions, the class composition, like it's not going to go anywhere.
Well, we're coming up on the 2-hour mark, and I want to thank you so much, John, for coming in and talking to us. Really appreciate your work. I love getting triggered and thinking about life in North Dakota.
Glad I could bring up some upsetting memories. Glad I got that.
What's going on? This was a really, really good conversation. We got into really some deep weeds here on some really
John,
strategic problems.
Something as a Southerner, John, I'm sure you will appreciate this. What I'm about to say: tater tot hot dish looks like throw up.
Buddy, I'm right there with you. I did not expect myself to ever live in a region where ranch dressing is considered spicy, but here we are. Shots fired. Shots fired, man. Hey,
No,
you
it
know,
was yes, it was a whole. Keep in mind, John, I went from cooking for coon asses in the South to Yankees up north. Total mind fuck, and yes, everything was too hot.
Jason, I'm going to put you on the prayer list here at the local Lutheran church. We're going to put Jason Miles on the prayer list this week. Y'all prayers up for him.
Prayerless. I started thinking about my mama. He said prayerless. I said, oh my God. This cat is from the South.
John, I appreciate it more than you know, because I mean, just when I'm reading your thing, I get these flashbacks of just shitty white dudes in those Carhartt jackets with frostbitten faces and lots of fights, threatening people with knives. Oh, I don't miss those days at all. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. Djene, I can't wait for you to come back to the U.S. I don't like this whole we never get to have our daily 5-way conversations with Djene, Pascal, and Cuba sometimes.
Pause.
Hey.
I said conversations. I didn't say 5 ways. I said 5 ways.
No homo.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you, Djene.
Thank you,
Of course,
John.
thank you, Pascal. I got to finish this video essay. Personal Jesus, the seduction of philanthrocapitalism.
And if people didn't watch it, watch Pascal on the Majority Report.
Oh yeah, check that out. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was a pretty interesting appearance.
Leave comments so that they bring him back.
Yes, and I want to hear what you guys have to say about organizing strategies in places like in the industrial sector. We talk about organizing Amazon warehouses. Can we organize Amazon drivers?
True.
Organize UPS drivers.
And
But we
everybody
don't
check out.
organize FedEx drivers. You guys know FedEx is not a union.
Well, I imagine they wouldn't have a union because they suck.
That's why they get paid a lot less. Yeah.
And also, everybody, if you can, follow us at Sublation Mag on Twitter. The exciting new place for whatever we manage to do.
It's going to be an exciting new place to read some articles from me, from Pascal, from Cuba. I don't know.
I just wanted to add, like, I'll tell you a little story. The first Kurdish newspaper, Kurdistan, was published in 1898, right? And I did a lot of research on this newspaper, and I don't want Sublation magazine to end up like this newspaper, because like I was like reading it and I'm like, bro, like the guy who's publishing it, he's like clearly writing all the articles himself and just like putting it's like, I'm like, this is just another article by the guy who's like running the newspaper, because like I can't prove it, but I'm pretty sure the letters to the editor section is also he's also writing letters to his. I mean, I can't prove it, but it's like I'm like, he's written most of the articles in this thing.
Someone is accusing me of saying that unions are reactionary. What did I say? Unions are reactionary. I said union members can have reactionary politics. What are we talking about here?
Well, the bottom line is, please leave a comment. And yes, UPS is unionized. That's what I said.
Yeah.
I said
UPS
FedEx
is awesome. FedEx are a bunch of liars, because they told me they delivered something, and they said, we delivered at 9 o'clock in the morning. I was waiting by the door. And then they were like, no, you weren't there. I was like, I was there. And they're like, well, you have to come and pick it up from the depot. I'm like, what kind of Mickey Mouse service is making me go pick up my own letters?
the kind of Mickey Mouse service that doesn't allow unionized drivers.
Exactly.
Those motherfuckers make like $10 an hour, man. That's why everybody left to go work for Amazon. And on that note, we are out.